everyone, welcome to No Spin. Today, I'm going to try to explain the long, complicated relationship between the United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran in 10 minutes or less. Our relationship with Iran really kicked off at the beginning of World War II, in 1941, when our allies, the UK and the Soviet Union, moved in and invaded Western Iran in order to displace the believed Axis-leaning leader of Iran, Reza Shah. Reza Shah, in return, was forced to abdicate, and his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, became Shah and ruled until 1979. We'll get back to this guy later. During the war, Iran was a vital link in the Allied supply route of U.S. Lend-Lease supplies to the Soviet Union. In 1951, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, a militant nationalist, forced the parliament to nationalize the British-owned oil industry. Mossadegh was opposed by the Shah and was removed, but he quickly returned to power. In 1952 and 1953, the Abadan crisis took place when Mossadegh began nationalization of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. Established by the British in the early 20th century, the company shared profits with Iran, but the company withheld their financial records from the Iranian government. By 1951, Iranians supported nationalization of the AIOC, and their parliament unanimously agreed to nationalize its holding of what was at the time the British Empire's largest company. The British retaliated with an embargo on Iranian oil, which was supported by international oil companies. Over the following months, negotiations over control and compensation for the oil were deadlocked, and Iran's economy deteriorated. Meanwhile, President Truman pressed Britain to moderate its position in the negotiations and to not invade Iran. American policies created a feeling in Iran that the United States was on Mossadegh's side. An optimism that the oil dispute would soon be settled, with the U.S. providing major political and economic support, grew. Mossadegh even visited Washington, and the American government seemed to support him, making frequent statements expressing. While all of this was going on, as the United States honored the British embargo and seemed to support Mossadegh, supposedly without Truman's knowledge, the CIA station in Tehran began carrying out covert activities against Mossadegh and his movement. As the Cold War intensified, oil negotiations stalled, and President Dwight D. Eisenhower replaced Truman. The United States helped to stabilize Mossadegh, believing that the rising internal tensions and continued deterioration in Iran might lead to a breakdown of government authority and open the way for at least a gradual assumption of control by Iran's Tudeh Communist Party. In the spring and summer of 1953, the United States and Britain, through a covert operation the CIA called Operation Ajax, conducted from the American Embassy in Tehran, helped organize a coup d'etat to overthrow the Mossadegh government. The operation initially failed and the Shah fled to Italy, but a second attempt succeeded and Mossadegh was imprisoned, and the Shah returned. Speaking of the Shah, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi maintained close ties with the United States during most of his reign, which lasted from 1941 until he was overthrown by Islamic Revolution in 1979. He pursued a westernizing, modernizing economic policy and a strongly pro-Western foreign policy. He also made numerous visits to America, where he was regarded as a friend. In 1978, domestic turmoil swept the country as a result of religious and political opposition to the Shah's rule and programs, especially the SAVAK, the hated Internal Security and Intelligence Service. In 1979, in January, the Shah left Iran. He died abroad several years later. On February 1, 1979, exiled religious leader Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned from France to direct a revolution resulting in a new, theocratic republic guided by Islamic principles. He had been exiled after denouncing the Shah and the United States because he didn't like the diplomatic immunity granted by the Shah to American military personnel in Iran, which would allow members of the U.S. armed forces in Iran to be tried in their own military courts. After 15 years in exile in Turkey, Iraq, and France, he became Iran's national religious leader. In 1980, the conflict between Iran and Iraq begins after Sunni Iraq invaded Shiite Iran. The U.S. supported Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War, establishing full diplomatic relations with Saddam Hussein's government by removing it from the state sponsors of terrorism list and providing them with intelligence. In 1983, Hezbollah, a Shiite Islamist organization and client of Iran, carried out several anti-American terrorist attacks, including the April 1983 United States Embassy bombing, which killed 17 Americans, the Beirut barracks bombing, which killed 241 U.S. peacekeepers in Lebanon, and the 1996 Khobar Towers bombing. 5 years later, in 1988, the U.S. launched Operation Praying Mantis against Iran, thus pressuring Iran to agree to a ceasefire with Iraq. Following Khomeini's death in 1989, the Assembly of Experts, an elected body of senior clerics, chose the outgoing president of the Republic, Ali Khamenei, to be his successor as Ayatollah. Throughout the 90s, Iran was accused of supporting a series of Hamas and Hezbollah terrorist attacks throughout the world, prompting President Clinton to impose far-reaching oil and trade sanctions on Iran in 1995. We scaled back some of the sanctions after Iran elected reformist President Mohammad Khatami as president. After ousting Saddam Hussein and occupying Iraq in 2003, the U.S. accused Iran of helping Shiite militants kill American soldiers. Soon after, the U.S. succeeded in getting 4 rounds of UN sanctions passed against Iran. They demanded Tehran stop enriching uranium and exporting weapons, and they set banking, trade, and travel restrictions. In 2009, Obama took office, promising engagement with Iran. A few years later, in 2011, a civil war in Syria broke out, with the U.S. and Iran supporting opposite sides. After violence broke out, Tehran actively helped Syrian President Bashar Assad, while Washington slowly expanded aid to the rebels. During this time of crisis, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria was able to gain in momentum and power, taking over a large portion of the country and attacking both sides, as well as attacking other places around the world. In 2012, the U.S. began working with countries around the world to reduce oil purchases from Iran. A year later, Iran's exports dropped by half and its economy deteriorated. Several rounds of nuclear negotiations between Iran and world powers failed to make progress. Then, finally, in July of 2015, the U.S. and Iran signed an agreement on Iran's nuclear program. Iran would redesign, convert, and reduce its nuclear facilities and accept the additional protocol with provisional application in order to lift all nuclear-related economic sanctions, freeing up tens of billions of dollars in oil revenue and frozen assets. As we all know, this agreement has been very controversial. Some argue that Iran is the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, a threat across the Middle East, and a country that has covert cells ready to inflict carnage around the globe. So allowing Iran access to billions of dollars in exchange for curbs on its nuclear program is not a good idea. This has caused the Trump administration to begin trying to dismantle the Iran deal. Of course, as you can see, ties with Iran aren't really getting better, especially with Trump's travel and visa ban on Iranian citizens, and also his new wave of sanctions following Iran's illegal test firing of a ballistic missile. But things have gotten kind of weird, considering the fact that now both the US and Iran are fighting ISIS together-ish. But you know what they say. The enemy of my enemy is my frenemy? And that's all the time we have left for Frenemies, the US and Iran. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.